Hey everyone, going to go over the lesson on modifiers in this video. Bring that up now. Okay, so we're talking about garbled sentences and modifiers in this lesson. So first, garbled sentences. What do we mean by that? Well, when something is garbled, it means it's unclear, difficult to understand. So these are the sentences that sort of make us stop and say, huh? Like, there's just something about the sentence that isn't right. So we end up with garbled sentences for several reasons, probably even more reasons than, what I'm going to discuss here. I think one of the most common reasons we end up with garbled sentences is because we aren't really paying attention and we aren't proofreading. We aren't going back and looking closely at what we've written. Kind of related to that is also sort of being in a rush, or maybe actually we have been writing and we get interrupted. And then we try to pick up where we left off and we don't quite get it right. It's almost like we have multiple ways of expressing a single thought, right? There are an infinite number of ways that you could word your ideas. And as you begin writing, you might be thinking about the best way to say what you're thinking, the best way to write it out. And there are, again, infinite possibilities. Maybe in your head at the time, you might think, okay, well, I could say it this way, or maybe I should say it this way instead. So we start off expressing the thought one way, and for whatever reason, we get part of the way through and we sort of jump tracks and finish the thought in a completely different way. It's almost like we took the beginning of our first option and the end of our second option and put them together. But because it was two different ways of expressing that idea, and we've only, we've used part of one and part of another, instead of clearly expressing that idea, it becomes confusing. But again, I think mostly garbled sentences are a result of going too quickly for one reason or another. And there's not really any one specific grammar rule that gets broken when we have a garbled sentence. It's just a bad sentence that needs to be fixed. It's just unclear, confusing. And in addition to those types of sentences where we end up with confusion because we just haven't worded it in a way that makes perfect sense, we can also end up with confusing sentences because we have misused modifiers. Modifiers are what we add to our writing to make it more interesting, to give our readers more information about the topic. Sometimes modifiers can come in simple forms like adjectives and adverbs, right? The red house. The adjective red there is a modifier. It adds on to the noun house. Or she walked quickly. Quickly is an adverb that describes how she walked. It's adding more information, modifying that verb, walked. But other times, our modifiers can be a group of words or a phrase. And no matter what form they come in, we have to make sure that we're using modifiers clearly, and that the modifier we're using is clearly modifying the correct part of our sentence. Otherwise, it can get confusing It might even result in misunderstanding. So we're going to take a look at how we sort of can end up with garbled sentences and how we can run into issues with our modifiers, especially pronouns and like modifying phrases. All right. So as I was saying about garbled sentences, sometimes we end up with these confusing sentences because there are so many ways to express one idea, and we are thinking of those ideas or thinking of those ways as we're writing. And instead of choosing one way and sticking with it all the way through, we start off one way and then, like I said, sort of jump track and finish it another way. And even though option 1 expressed the same idea as option 2, if you're only taking part of option 1 and part of option 2, then it doesn't actually express the idea you wanted it to. It gets confusing. So I have some examples here. So some scientists claim marijuana causes nausea and dizziness, but the user of marijuana comes nowhere near resembling these effects. But the problem is, can a user resemble an effect? Not really. You know, I don't resemble an effect. Resemble means to share similarities. I don't resemble an effect. I experience an effect. So you would want to choose one way or the other of expressing that idea. Some scientists claim marijuana causes nausea and dizziness, but the user of marijuana comes nowhere near experiencing these effects. Or you could go the other route. Some scientists claim marijuana causes nausea and dizziness, but the real effects of marijuana come nowhere near resembling these. I think the first option is a little clearer. It kind of sticks with how the majority of the original sentence is worded and structured. We just needed to choose one way and stick with it. Sometimes we just are writing without thinking, and we sort of get ahead of ourselves and the words get a little jumbled, which is what happened here in this second example. Another question about the Chappaquiddick party is why the men who were married were their wives not there? That doesn't really make any sense. That's not the right way to word that thought. Why the men who were married were their wives not there? And it's supposed to be a question, but I can't figure out exactly what the question is. The question is trying to get, apparently there's this Chappaquiddick party. There are married men there, but apparently their wives were not there. So we need to clarify what we're actually asking. Another question about the Chappaquiddick party is why the wives of the married men were not there. Or another question about the Chappaquiddick party is why the married men were there without their wives. Either way is fine, but you can see if we're not taking our time, or at the very least, if we're not going back and reading each sentence carefully, it is super easy to end up with a garbled sentence like both of those examples. You really need to make sure that you are clarifying your ideas, that you are stating them in a way that is crystal clear to the reader, so that A, the reader gets the correct information, and B, so that the reader doesn't get frustrated and just stops reading. Another reason that we can end up with confusion in our sentences, again, is because of our use of modifiers. So sometimes we can have a faulty or misplaced modifier. Misplaced, meaning we have the correct modifier, but we simply haven't put it in the correct place within the sentence. So I have some examples here. Pound wrote to Eliot many times while he was editor of Poetry magazine. So here's the problem with that. The rules of modifiers, especially pronouns, is that the noun that the pronoun refers to should come closest to the pronoun in the sentence. We have two nouns in this sentence, Pound and Eliot. We have a pronoun, he. Which he does that pronoun refer to? Based on the rules of pronoun usage, it should refer to the one it comes closest to, which would be Eliot. In that case, what this sentence would be telling us is that Pound wrote to Eliot many times while Eliot was editor of Poetry magazine. But this is wrong because it's actually Pound who was the editor of Poetry magazine. So now our reader has walked away with incorrect information, all because we weren't clear with our pronoun reference. We didn't structure the sentence correctly so that the pronoun clearly connects to the correct noun. So it needed to say something like Pound, while he was editor of Poetry magazine, wrote to Eliot many times. Or, while he was editor of Poetry magazine, Pound wrote to Eliot many times. That way, in both of these examples, the pronoun he comes closer to Pound both times. That lets us know for sure that the he that's being referred to, the he that was the editor of the magazine, was in fact Pound, not Eliot. Here's another example. Laura Allende spoke of terror and repression at Loyola. So again, remembering the rules of modifiers, the modifier should come closest to the thing it is modifying. This phrase right here, terror and repression at Loyola, it makes it sound like the terror and repression are happening at Loyola, right? Laura Allende spoke of terror and repression at Loyola. But that's not actually what's happening. The terror and repression are happening in Chile. She is simply speaking about it at Loyola. So again, this leaves the reader with a completely incorrect idea. It's not correct information. We need to clarify. Laura Allende, while at Loyola, spoke of terror and repression. Now, without any other context, even that sentence, while still more grammatically correct, isn't necessarily clear. With just one sentence to go from, we should actually include even more information just to be on the safe side. And we should say, while at Loyola, Laura Allende spoke of terror and repression in Chile. Then the reader knows exactly what I'm trying to say. Here's another example. All right. The computer is also used to recall master lists of all a company owns for inventory purposes. All a company owns, here's the modifier, for inventory purposes. What is for inventory purposes? Well, all a company owns. That's what it goes with. That's what this sentence is telling me, that this computer creates a list and the items on that list. It is a list of items the company owns for inventory purposes. All of the things it uses to track inventory. That's what's on this list. But that is not what's on the list. The list contains everything the company owns. Why do we have the list? For inventory purposes. So the computer is used for inventory purposes to recall master lists of all a company owns. You want to make sure that you're putting the modifier in the correct place in the sentence so that the reader obtains the correct information. Again, all three of those examples, right? Ezra and Pound in the magazine, Laura Linde and the Talk of Terror, and the computer and list of items. All three of those are examples of misplaced modifiers. Misplaced. So again, they're simply in the wrong place. But we also have this other category down here called a dangling modifier. And this type of modifier, it's not just misplaced, it's downright wrong, incorrect. Because a misplaced modifier, you can fix that just by rearranging the order of the words in the sentence, taking the modifier and putting it where it actually needs to be. But a dangling modifier, we can't even find the word or phrase that it modifies. Our brain will connect the dots and the sentence will most likely be understood, but grammatically speaking, it's not correct because the modifier is just dangling out there because the noun it's supposed to modify got left out of the sentence. So here's some examples. This is our dangling modifier, and they often start with these ing gerunds, right? Lacking enough money, the Florida trip was a disaster. We can probably understand what this author meant. But let's look at the sentence logically. We know that the modifier needs to be placed near the noun which it modifies. Lacking enough money, the Florida trip was a disaster. So this is telling me that the Florida trip is what lacked enough money. But can a trip lack money? No. So who or what does lack the money? Probably the author, right? Lacking enough money, I thought the Florida trip was a disaster. Or because I lacked enough money, the Florida trip was a disaster. Either way is fine, but you can see that despite how our brain is able to make sense of the sentence, logically, the words that are actually there don't make sense. Lacking enough money, the Florida trip was a disaster. A trip can't lack money. People lack money, but there's no people in that sentence. Therefore, you have to add the person in. You have to add the correct noun that goes with that modifier. And as you can see, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of work to make it correct. But you still have to add it in, and maybe you need to change or add more than just one word. It's a very, very small, quick change, though, to fix it. We have another example here. The house lights were turned down, waiting for the actors to appear on the stage. So again, The house lights were turned down. Here's our modifier, waiting for the actors to appear on the stage. Well, what's waiting for the actors to appear on the stage? According to this sentence, the house lights were waiting for the actors to appear on stage. But we know that's not right. House lights can't wait. They aren't living things. So who or what is waiting for the actors to appear on stage? Probably the audience. But the audience is missing from the actual sentence. Therefore, we need to add something to the sentence so that the audience is in the sentence. The house lights were turned down as the audience waited for the actors to appear on the stage. Or as the audience waited for the actors to appear on the stage, the house lights were turned down. I like this first version better, much more straightforward and to the point. And all we had to do was, instead of saying waiting for the actors to appear on stage, we had to say as the audience waited for the actors to appear on stage. So not much that needed to be fixed, right? Not much that needed to be changed, but still an important error that needs to be corrected. So garbled sentences that are just in our haste of writing or our inability to choose which way we want to word something, we end up with sentences that are just unclear. The wording is just not sound. Then we have misplaced modifiers, and then we have dangling modifiers. Let's take a look at some more examples here. We have some real life examples of some garbled sentences. We're not going to look at all of them, just a few. How about the first one? I am forwarding my marriage certificate and 6 children. I have 7, but 1 died, which was baptized on half-sheet paper. So this was someone who was really getting ahead of themselves and did not was not successful in conveying exactly what they meant. I am forwarding my marriage certificate, okay, and 6 children. I don't think they're forwarding their children. More than likely, they're forwarding the birth certificates of their 6 children. If they're forwarding the marriage certificate, and then right after that, they mention 6 children, makes sense that what they're really trying to say is, I am forwarding my marriage certificate and the birth certificates of my 6 children. I have 7, but 1 died. All right. I have 7 children, but 1 died. I have included their baptism record on a half sheet of paper. That appears to be what this person was attempting to say. But because they didn't take their time, it is really easy to walk away from that example and not really understand what was being said and maybe not care because it's a little frustrating that you can't figure it out or that it sounds so off that we don't want to take the time to try to figure it out. Here's one. Unless I get my husband's money pretty soon, I will be forced to lead an immortal life. This could just be a simple editing error, proofreading error. It could be one of those moments where spell check doesn't actually help you because the word immortal here is spelled correctly, but it's not the right word because immortal means that you never die. And I don't think that's what they mean by unless I get my husband's money pretty soon, I will be forced to lead an immortal life. They probably mean an immoral life. Immoral, meaning they're going to have to resort to crime of some sort to make money, right? Here's a good one. In accordance with your instructions, I have given birth to twins in the enclosed envelope. I don't think they birthed the twins in the envelope, but that is what the sentence tells us. More than likely, what they're trying to say is, I gave birth to my twins, and as instructed, I have included their birth certificates in the enclosed envelope. Again, what else would they be sending in an envelope that has to deal with the twins they just gave birth to? And again, you can kind of see I'm making the best guess that I possibly can with these, which kind of proves the point that you really need to make sure that you don't have these garbled sentences, because then you don't want to make your reader have to try to figure it out in the first place. They shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to try to figure out what these sentences are trying to say. But second, I'm doing the best I can with the information given to me. What if I'm wrong? I think I'm making the best sense out of this that I can, but what if I'm wrong? I still don't have the correct information. And I don't know what's worse, not having any clue at all or thinking that I figured it out and being wrong about it. Very important to make sure that you are taking your time and that you are going back and reading each sentence carefully to ensure that you do not have any type of garbled sentence where the wording is just so faulty that it's hard to figure out what you were trying to say. And actually, the best way to do this is to have someone else read it for you. You know, you don't have to ask them to like look for grammar and mechanic errors or anything like that. Just, can you please read this? Look at each sentence and tell me if every one of them makes sense. Because one of the bad things about trying to do it yourself, and I still suggest, do it on your own first. And then if you're really not sure that every sentence is sound, then ask someone else to read it for you. Because even when we try to review what we've written to pick up on these types of errors, we wrote it. We know what we were trying to say. And when we read it, our brain will sometimes correct that error as we go, and we won't actually see it. So I don't want to make that sound like you shouldn't even try to catch these types of errors, because you should. Another good way to do it on your own is to read it backwards, not the sentence, but like you have a paragraph, start with the last sentence. Read the last sentence first, then the second to last sentence. So you just read it in reverse, because then your brain's not necessarily jumping ahead of itself, because your brain knows what it was supposed to sound like from beginning to end. Your brain's not necessarily going to be able to keep up and bridge those gaps where the wording is faulty if you're reading it from back to front. But again, having someone else take a second look is always a good idea as well. Take a look at some examples of misplaced and dangling modifiers while we're here. I'm going to go down to the version that has the answers. I have revisions to the rest of the garbled sentences as well, if you want to look through them. Let's look here at our misplaced and dangling modifiers. All right, so how about this one? He went to the library wearing a leather jacket. The library wearing a leather jacket? I don't know that I've ever seen a library wearing any kind of jacket, let alone a leather jacket. But I don't think that's what this person was trying to say. I don't think the library is wearing a leather jacket. More than likely, the he in the sentence was wearing the leather jacket. So what we have here is a misplaced modifier. Because we have the correct subject there in the sentence, the modifier is simply not in the right spot. So you could say, while wearing a leather jacket, he went to the library. Or he wore a leather jacket to the library. Either one is fine. What about this one? The conductor spends a lot of time talking about his grandchildren on our train. His grandchildren on our train. Well, that makes it sound like his grandchildren are actually on the train. But that's not the case. He is simply on the train talking about his grandchildren. So again, a misplaced modifier. The conductor on our train spends a lot of time talking about his grandchildren. How about, oh, here we go, number 5. Forgetting to buy gas, the car wouldn't start. So what that beginning modifier is saying is that the car forgot to buy gas. But we know that's not true. The ar didn't forget to buy gas. Somebody forgot to buy gas, and the car won't start. So if this is about ourselves, this is a personal statement, we just need to add ourselves into the sentence. I forgot to buy gas, so the car wouldn't start. What about this one? My dog was hit by a truck running across the road. The truck wasn't running across the road. The dog was. So a truck hit my dog while he was running across the road. Or running across the road, my dog was hit by a truck. You could do it that way as well. Number 11. Looking out the airplane window, the volcano seemed ready to erupt. So what that sentence is telling me is that the volcano was looking out the airplane window and is ready to erupt. But we know only one of those is true. The volcano is not sitting by the airplane window, is not looking out the airplane window, but it probably is ready to erupt, or at least looks that way. But the person sitting in the plane and looking out the window is missing from the sentence, so they need to be added in. Looking out the airplane window, I thought the volcano seemed ready to erupt. Right? I think hopefully that's enough to sort of give you a good idea of what we mean by misplaced and dangling modifiers, and how, it might not seem like a big deal, but when you read each sentence the way it's originally worded, and you really think about what it's saying, you can see that it doesn't really make sense. 3 men talked quietly in the corner smoking pipes. The corner is not smoking pipes. The men are smoking pipes. The 3 men smoking pipes talked quietly in the corner. You have to be careful, especially with the dangling modifiers, but also with the misplaced modifiers. And actually, those might be harder because, or even more important, because those are the ones that can really confuse the reader or cause the reader to walk away with the wrong idea. So be on the lookout for these. You'll get some practice. Hopefully looking through these examples here. But if you do have questions about garbled sentences, misplaced modifiers, or dangling modifiers, definitely reach out. Otherwise, you're free to go ahead and move on to the next thing.